Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here, and I just want to give a quick shout out to all of you for being such great listeners. And we know that you're such great listeners because we see it in the subscription numbers. We see it in terms of the new downloads that are coming because those of you that are fans of the show are sharing it with people you know. And that also means that you find that the content we have here, the topics that we discuss, and the guests that we have on the show are super helpful and insightful and give you a lot of value. So again, we can't thank you enough for the actions you're taking and just creating more awareness about indie game movement. And one way that I would love to thank you is, whether you know it or not, if you go to my website, rengenmarketing.com, and sign up for the email list, the welcome email will have a free game marketing plan template. I've had people reach out to me saying how helpful this has been for them. And I also know that it's been used in a college course teaching game development. So if you think this is something that's going to be helpful and valuable for you, please go to Rengen Marketing, sign up for that email list, and get your free game marketing plan template. I promise you won't be disappointed. And again, can't thank you enough for being such great listeners here on the show. With that, let's get right to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about how your process is in your product. Now, your systems and processes as a developer or studio can dictate everything about your project, from how you source your funding to implementing your game's vision and communicating that to players through marketing. It's all done by having systems in place. The challenge with this is we may not always be aware of how each of these areas can be more defined in terms of how it relates to time, resources, quality, and even communication. So today, our guest shares his insights on how clearly defined processes across your entire business can contribute to having a solid product, a great team, and a sustainable studio. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Xalavier Nelson Jr. Xalavier, how's it going, man? Thank you so much for being on the show today.
It goes well. My cat refuses to stop throwing up today, so that has added a whole little difficulty modifier and everything. But aside from that, I'm pretty dang good.
Oh, poor guy and everything. And I what is it? Some of it's attributed to his eating habits, and that's maybe I think you were, prior to the call, you were saying that he kind of brings it on himself in that line, but otherwise he's good. It just is a little bit of a disruptive force. But I'm glad. Yeah. But he's doing well and everything.
Yeah, he's doing well. He just, as will occasionally happen with the game production cycle, everything is going bad for reasons that he could have avoided, and he chose to do it anyway, and look for an escape route. That escape route being me and my desire to take care of him. So my suffering is ongoing.
I love how you directly related that to game development. So good.
I think about processes and how often our processes are broken all the time.
Yes. And so true. And why we're here today. But before we get into that, and we will very soon, folks, I just wanted to quickly introduce Xalavier here because there's a lot going on. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of him, but if you're not, he's the studio head of Strange Scaffold Games. You guys have quite a bit of games there, really interesting ones, and other things that you've worked on too. Like Stranger Things VR, Reigns Beyond, Hypnospace Outlaw, an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, Space Warlord organ trading simulator, and you're currently working on El Paso Elsewhere, but you have an upcoming release for a really fun game called Sunshine Shuffle. Why don't you talk about that one a little bit? Because that one's coming up. That's coming up soon, right? The release?
It's coming up real soon. We're going to announce the release date and an additional platform that it will be hitting at launch
Ooh.
in the very near future. Sunshine Shuffle is a narrative poker adventure. It's Animal Crossing meets Poker Night, the Inventory, the Telltale classic that is kind of unprecedented. It's the only time it's ever been attempted. Characters banter back and forth while you're playing cards. In this case, adorable animal friends who robbed a bank 12 years ago tell you how and why they did it so that they don't get executed by the mafia. And also, they let you decorate their boat.
Yes. A game where I can decorate boats and try to escape the claws of the mafia, so to speak.
Those are the two things you need from every video game.
I love it. Awesome. Well, that's definitely something to look out for, and maybe we'll talk about a little bit in our conversation today, I'm sure, and other things. But also some other stuff I want to call out about you, really cool and exciting things. For example, you've been a BAFTA nominated studio head and award-winning narrative director and writer. And also a public speaker on various fronts at GDC, at DICE, many other things. And actually, one thing I want to kind of do a shout out and call out to was a recent one that I saw you participate in, which was Digital Doc Games. I think it was early in April. It was they have a Game Changer season, and I watched that video. It was so insightful, and if anybody wants to get a little bit to know you a little bit more, I think that's such a great video to watch as well too. So quick shout out to those guys, and just wanted to call out. That was really a great talk that I saw. So, but you do a lot of great things there. So, anyways, lots of cool things, and of course you have a comic, right? Sherlock Holmes Hunts the Mothman.
Yeah. During the pandemic, one of the things I did was finally decide I'd always been deeply inspired by and had my creative process affected by the work of comics. And I always wanted to eventually do something there. And I was like, okay, the way I got into games was by just doing the work and then eventually finding finding a way to work in the space by working in the space.
Nice.
So I started writing these comics. One was called, I think one of my favorites was called, let me get the exact name. Bring a shot this today. Comic was called so during the pandemic, can I start from the beginning?
Go ahead. I'm curious.
During the pandemic, I had the opportunity to the game certainly didn't get less busy, but I had always been impacted by comics in my creative process, especially when I was hitting my late teens and I got out of that whole early homeschooler phase of being like, I don't read books with pictures. I realized just how rich the medium of graphic novels and comics was. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to make inroads into comics by doing the work, same way I did getting into games. And I wrote Sherlock Holmes Hunts the Mothman as an episodic miniseries. I wrote this one that I think might be my favorite, called Universal Constant, which is about this young woman named Pip, Philippa Constant. And her whole thing is whenever she dies, she comes back to life. So what does she do during late stage capitalism with that ability? She dies in interesting ways for money. So a window into her life and her experience. Yeah, I did some comics, and every time I released a new comic, it would shoot up to the top of the itch charts and so on. And I'm doing some more comic work now. So I guess it worked.
Yeah. And some more things to look out for and stuff. And one, I just want to call out too. It's just like, I love that process and how you were like, hey, if I want to get into this, I'm just going to do it. Cause I know sometimes we might have, reasons why we feel we can't do something because we don't have that level of expertise or experience and everything else. And you're like, well, I'm just gonna make it happen. And I mean, I don't know your history in terms of what experiences, what you had, other than you just had that drive of, hey, let's make it happen. And you did. And here we are, So
Yeah,
awesome.
I also, to a degree, haven't had the luxury of believing that my work or ability to transfer skills would be inherently recognized. So from an early age, I was deeply driven to not just work inside of a space, but be a really active force within it. Have any genre you can mention on my resume, any studio size on my resume, so that if the worst came to the worst, I could take care of myself and my family and say, you know what, I haven't just it's not just that I can do it. I've done it before, or I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
And I think I passed the 70 plus title mark late last year.
Nice. I mean, it's so good to hear that, because I think hearing those things in drive and everything else like that is can be a big motivator and everything. And just to see how you're doing that, hitting those marks and everything, and everything else that I kind of laid out briefly, what you've accomplished is a good sign of that. So it's always good hearing that. But I want to know a little bit more about you too, in a fun way, which means that we are about to enter the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is just a quick series of random questions I have prepared for Xalavier. And Xalavier, are you ready to go into the Q Box round?
If there is anything I'm ready to do, it is to go into a box at literally any time.
All right. So he is ready. So first, then, is what is your most influential or inspiring game?
I'd say one of them at this point is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard.
Okay.
Game in its structure, because we had Resident Evil 4, 5, 6. Yep. There's a lot of divided opinions on 6. They're looking at how do we not just use this as a showcase for the technology that we want to use for our future, but also how do you make Resident Evil a relevant game in the public eye again? They did that with a two-pronged business strategy. The first was the remakes, but also this original title that offered something different to the Resident Evil titles before, and its structure and how it addresses past, present, and even future criticisms of the Resident Evil series to be a self-contained statement of intent and a continually relevant entry in the series for that long tail sales, even though it was a one and done game. There's so much I admire about its structure and about the decisions that it makes that and quite a few of the games in the horror space, honestly, things like The Evil Within 2. You could argue that Planescape Torment is a bit of a horror role-playing game. I admire games that have really intentional structures that tell you how to view the game you're playing as if you're listening as you're playing it.
I like that a lot. That's so much to unpack from that, but we're not here for that, unfortunately, because if I were to let myself, I think we would definitely have that conversation. But
yeah, this is the Q box. I have to get out of the box.
Right. Well, all right. So it is the Q box. So next one, man, you got my cogs turning though, because it's everything you just talked about is something like totally and like things that I am so curious about now. So again, I'll look into it more. Maybe we'll talk offline. I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. But in terms of Q box round and now. Next question is, what's one habit you do to keep a clear and healthy mind?
I try to read my Bible first thing in the day. And I build spaces for rest in my overall schedule. There have to be times when you aren't thinking about work. There have to be times when you do decompress and ingest new material so you don't burn out. So yeah, the joke whenever I announce something new is, when do you sleep? And the answer is, I would die and not be here if I didn't sleep. I make sure I'm getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep a night. I center myself with my faith, and I try to live in alignment with my goals and principles as much as possible.
It's awesome to hear, especially like even like on all those fronts, but even with the whole, when people are questioning, like, do you sleep or whatever? Because sometimes depending on how, let's say, where we always try to strive for maybe is like omnipresent, where it seems like we're always doing something right, but how sometimes that can be interpreted as like, oh wow, this guy never sleeps, but it's just how we're viewing it. So I'm glad you call out to that, because some people might misinterpret that and think that, he doesn't sleep, so maybe I just need to push myself harder. And it's like, well, and there lies some of the problems we have with burnout, right? So glad that this is that you called out to those things, and also, staying true to your principles and everything else.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It is, I think, a pretty big reason why we run into some of the issues that we do as well. When it does come to, for example, student teams starting up and then destroying themselves, because they look at GDC advice, they look at what creators that they respect are saying about their process, and they either assume things or they go like, oh, they said if you just make a great game, it will sell, so we're just going to make a great game, and they ignore all this other context. This is one of the quotes I dislike most in the world is, a rushed game is forever bad, but a delayed game will be good. It's often attributed to Shigeru Miyamoto. I've heard it said in everywhere from like tiny, like 2-person indie teams all the way up to AAA rooms. And it was said by effing Shigeru Miyamoto. Of course, he gets more time. If he wants more time, he invented the Super Mario Brothers, a movie now starring Jack Black. He gets to say a delayed game will be good. Operative word, will. There's all these things embedded in that piece of advice that, if removed of context, I've seen that then motivate decisions by people that have consequences.
Yeah. No, it's great to say that. And this is actually a common theme I have seen recently in my life and called out in recent interactions. Is just, be mindful of where you are and the context you receive information, where you are on your journey, because if you start taking these things verbatim, it could be detrimental. Because right. And again, it's all important stuff. So one last thing I got to ask for in light of the Q Box round, though, what game are you playing now?
I put in the work, and I'm delighted to say I now get Destiny. It was a long journey, but the team is, you can actively see how much they are attempting to fold people into a game and a universe unlike anything else out there. And after a few weeks of consistent chipping away at it, I'm in, and I'll be honest, right now, I'm deeply enjoying this conversation, but I am thinking about the bounties I could be doing. I have an upcoming trip, and I want to get in a couple of my weeklies before the end of the week, so I can get some pinnacle gear. I'm down bad, man. It's not great.
Well, yeah, it's like, I'm having this conversation right now when I could be. I love it.
It speaks to how much I value the work of indie game moment.
Yeah, no, good stuff. All right, awesome. Well, thank you for diving in a little bit and sharing that stuff with us. So, like, again, so much we could impact from it, but still, it's just so good to hear those things and everything else and learn a little bit more about you. So, But now we're going to learn a lot more, not necessarily just about you, but about like your process and things around that and how it's really affecting the, the industry as a whole, or just developers and so many people. And so what I want to kick off this discussion around, the process is really in your product, right? Is why do you think a well-defined process is a key component to not only a means for sustainability, but how a game or studio represents itself?
Great question. Your products are inextricable from your processes. The impact you have on the human beings who work on your products, your projects, your the things you put out into the world are inextricable from your process. In a lot of ways, I feel like your studio is your processes. If, for example, you prioritize really rapid iteration cycles that maybe get you something that looks cool, but stack up a bunch of work down the line, especially around launch, to polish the edges and the edge cases so it can be shipped at all, that is something that if you recognize it and work intentionally around that, you can create a healthy version of it. But if you don't, and you're just like, we're going to plan out this dev cycle, the end of the dev process looks similar to the middle of production, then of course you're going to crunch because you haven't reckoned with your actual goals, priorities, your actual values, and how that then manifests itself in your processes. So the thing, the drum I've been banging lately is your processes speak to the values of your studio. And if you want to actually practice what you preach, you're going to alter your processes over time to reach your, what's the word for it? You're going to alter your processes over time to reach your spoken values.
And could you, is it okay to even say, like, even go beyond that to like reach greater potential, create thriving environments? I mean, I'm just throwing random things, but I just see how all these things can possibly interconnect.
Absolutely. When you work in alignment with your processes, you get higher efficiency, partially because you're deeply confronting the realities of the project you're working on, the team you're working with, and the way you're going about making the thing. In the process, you might determine, hey, maybe this isn't the type of game we should be making or pitching in the future because it actually doesn't fit the team, or it actually doesn't fit the processes that we put in place and embedded into a milestone schedule with our publisher. And we're suffering all the time. And it's because all the necessary elements did not match. So, when you work with your strengths, when you work around your priorities, you do end up with an exponential benefit. And I think one of the great examples of this, there's two. They're very different from each other. The first is Sock Pop. Sock Pop has their Patreon. They have this practice, which I believe has slowed down, but before it was like a game a week, right? Or two games a month. And they built those games to fit those limitations and what they had previously made and had tools to build as a team, as well as like what they wanted to make now. And every single Sock Pop release fits the mold of their processes. So you have a giant hit like Stacklands, and then you'll have a game which might get 5 Steam reviews instead. And it doesn't matter because they're operating holistically and they get to have enough of a enormous output to account for the losses and the successes, particularly with the community engagement they built up. Take the works of New Blood Games as a direct contrast. And they will spend 8 years on a game to make sure that when you fire a gun, the brass that is ejected from the magazine recoils the right way off of the wall because of their emphasis on polish. But they, again, build community strategy directly to align with those processes. They take the situation that they're in, having now several hit games, in order to bolster games new and old and to directly support that type of long-term iterative dev cycle coming from a immediate high concept. They are working in alignment with everything they say that they believe and everything they value in games. And you see that has, again, an exponential impact. They find their people and their people commit to them hard, because it isn't just a game studio. It is a game studio that in every aspect of its projection into the world, from its projects to its communication, is embodying values that people can connect to. It even keeps out the door some people who would otherwise be toxic in that community. Because if it's a strong enough manifestation of values, people can connect to it, but also say, hey, that's not for me. I don't play New Blood games. They're losing out. But it also means those people never end up being a part of the wider conversation around their games. So you don't get this kind of thing that happens around sometimes the most popular titles, where the game has objectively sold enough money to make Bobby Kotick smile for 0.5 seconds. The game is doing real dang well. But all of the conversation around that game is this mixed morass of hardcore defenders and then people who are buying it but talk against it. They're hate playing, hate commentating. If your game is a really strong, strong concept of itself, it gives people something to love and something to hate. And when you extrapolate that to the team and to the studio, again, you just have this exponential amplifier of impact on every level the more you are working in concert with yourself.
You know, those are such great examples. And the reason why I call that out, because one, it's like, we tend to think of process as like, oh, here's a system, we follow it, whatever, right? And Sock Pop, as you defined, has its own system in place. And then you also, but with New Blood, it's like you said, like each of them kind of look at things holistically, but in their own way, and as it kind of defines their objectives, their vision, their values, and everything else. And I think a lot of times that those types of things aren't necessarily thought about or considered, or maybe just they are, but not necessarily in kind of how you outline them and describe them. And again, that's why I think those two studios are such great examples, because it's just saying, well, you don't have to do it like this or that, but this is how one way that these people are doing it and how they're applying it, how they're looking at it from a different angle, and really taking that process is such a more broad term than I think we typically think about it. Cause I think at face value, it's like, oh, process with development, but it's so much more, especially like you said with New Blood, cause community, right? Like that, but it carries over to community. It is simply not just about the dev cycles and that. But with that in mind, I want to kind of lead into something, because you got me thinking more and about this, because it's like, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about what you're just sharing there in terms of like learning, implementing, and even improving those processes and how they relate to some of those things you were just talking about. Because honestly, establishing a clear and defined process, let's face it, can be a process in itself, and probably is a lot more work than we would like to admit and be like, oh, we don't want to do that. But anyways, with that being the case, how do you go about learning systems you're confident in and implementing them and iterate from them?
So the way I go about implementing systems and processes that I am confident in is, first off, a lot of self interrogation and questioning. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Does it make me happy? Is it something I'm good at? Is it something that I can efficiently scale up or down? Should it be scaled at all? Starting from that place of self-knowledge and evaluation, I'm looking at my resources and my capacity. Do I have the time to do X, Y, or Z? Sunshine Shuffle is a game that has some branching dialogue, but very little because it's telling a single central strong story, one. And two, I know that when I was early in my career, I did a lot of branching narrative and dialogue. It is not something that particularly brings me joy. I work on it still for clients. I'll still sometimes do it myself, but I keep it limited to the range in which I will not go mad because I know the process and what it results in, 3 times the amount of work, if not more, considered at every stage of the process so that the player will look at one route and be like, oh, cool, I could have done other things, never play the other routes. That isn't how, that isn't something I consider efficient or super effective for how I make things. So I don't pitch giant branching nonlinear narrative games. I pitch things within the scope of the things that give me energy and that allow me to do my best work as directly and efficiently as possible. So yeah, the way I go about building systems is self-interrogation. I look at the resources. What can I afford? What can I personally afford in terms of my own expenditure of effort and capacity? I look at the team members or potential team members I'd be working with and ask what they value. Sometimes directly, often directly. Hey, is this a project you want to work on? Are there concerns you want to have with it? One of our upcoming projects had a vision pivot because we were really excited about the original concept, but we brought it to a member of the team and they started talking about, you know what? I'll just say the concept out loud. It's called Party Horse, or it was called Party Horse. Party Horse was a game about a radical horse, which it was a police horse that had cocaine accidentally dumped into its feed bag. And it stole its rider's glasses, became cool as hell, and went on a rampage throughout the city. And we considered that there might be multiple playable characters. And so we talked to some of our team members about this concept, and there was people who really dug it. But one person had experience with recreational drugs, unlike the rest of us. And they just talked through their experiences and what they'd observed. And at first, it was really funny to consider, oh man, what if there was a raccoon on heroin? And then you hear about, heroin from direct observed experience. It's like, well, dang, whew, that's a lot. And the developer we were working with voiced that, yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable, especially working on anything that had the inclusion or especially positive depiction of downers. And I was like, you know what? That's enough reason for us to take the core designs of this game and shift into a different concept entirely. Party Horse is not dead in my heart. There will be a form in which we bring it to life, but it's going to carry forward the legacy of everyone who's touched it and commented upon it, including that person, and how we depict a raccoon doing heroin, which is, we aren't. I'm not going to do that. Never say never, but it's pretty certain I'm not going to be doing a raccoon on heroin. So yeah, operating from, it sounds very simple to the point of being a little bit banal, but you would be amazed how often we work in contradiction with ourselves. And we will observe a several year dev cycle and say, man, we never want that to happen again, and pursue all the processes that make that happen again. So I look at what I've got, look at my resource capacity, that of my people, what I value and what I need, and I move from there. And because I've had the opportunity to observe so many dev cycles as well, operating from my values, it means I have a big store of knowledge and experience to pull from directly in further fine-tuning and hopefully hitting the bar with our intended process first time out.
Yeah, and you know what, and I won't, maybe for lack of a better words, but I think that in a way was really good in sharing that, because in a way it seems like it's a little bit of an extreme, right? Because it's dealing with a topic that could be, very impactful in a negative way to some people. But how often do those types of conversations not happen with even things that don't seem as that they could be as negative as, talking about drugs in a comical way, right? But where teams just go ahead and lead with this concepts, ideas, without really consulting or even asking. And I know sometimes we're like, well, if there's too many cooks or if there's too many opinions in this, but it's still probably there's a right way to approach it. And especially in what you provided, that was a really good way, because again, it still goes back to your values and sharing that vision. Because if people aren't aligned with it and everything else, how does that affect the process? It could, like, if you went forward with that, and it sounds like you're, for the definitely most likely not going to be doing that exact thing, with heroin, raccoon and everything else. But if you went forward, how would that, like, like you said, it would contradict with your values. It might contradict. It could create, without even realizing it, like toxic. Yeah, making it a non, like changing the culture of the work and the environment, right? Like it's just amazing how often this probably happens on a regular basis, because we don't think about what could come out of this by not looking at our process or not aligning it with our values and things like that.
I've known teams that years into making a game had a conversation with each other and went, wait, you don't like the game? I don't like the game. I thought you liked the game. Years into their process. Or as sometimes unfortunately happens, you've gone through pitch cycles. What you need to make this game is a publisher. You've pitched to all the publishers. The game does not have the support it needs to be made. I've seen people grind for years being like, I got to tell this story. I got to make this game. Well, you can't do that without publisher support based off of the type of game you're making. You either need to pivot away from it in order to receive that publisher support, or you have to accept that you're going to be grinding and spending your own money in order to eventually maybe have someone join you down the line. And that might not even be feasible for your project, but that's what you're committing to.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of this is there was a band called Death. It's known as basically like the first punk band. And it was a group of black brothers. They were going to get signed by a major record label. Take punk years before punk had really been codified as a thing into the national consciousness. The one thing is the publisher was like, hey, the record label rather, it's like, hey, band can't be called Death. We aren't going to sell. This is the 60s. We aren't going to, or the 70s or whatever. We aren't going to sell records that say Death on the front and then some other stuff. That would be weird, wild, untenable. The brothers looked at that and they said, this name means a lot to us. We are not going to change it. That meant that they did not explode to the degree they could have. That meant they didn't get the record label. But nonetheless, they made a decision knowing the consequences. And perhaps this is a somewhat cynical view built from years of just seeing it done differently to the detriment of all parties involved. But I would rather see a poor choice be made intentionally than a correct choice made accidentally.
Yeah.
Because a poor choice can be examined and iterated upon and changed. The accidental perfect choice, you don't have anything in place to make sure that happens again.
Right.
And if you want evidence of that, look at sequels in video games. How often do we not, even working from the same technology, be able to hit the same thing twice? Because we make a lot of really cool stuff on accident. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that speaks volumes to what you just said too, in terms of making a decision with like direct intention and knowing of that. Because again, because that also relates to like, hey, look, we could fail. I mean, we can always fail at whatever it is, whatever the task is, whatever is that's scaring us to fail. But then it's like, but at least there is that part of that experience that you can iterate from, and it's going to just make it that much more valuable in the long term. But if you're always getting lucky, well, then it's like, man, just wait until you get sidelined, right? Like it's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. So I think it's a really good thing to call out to that, because intention is so important. But a lot of times we forget about what that is because of these other ideas, these other things that might, create tunnel vision or distract us or whatever the case may be. So it's really cool to call out to that. Real quick though, because I know we're kind of coming up on time a little bit, and I want to be mindful of your time with us today. Few things I want to go into real quick. One is we talked earlier about like different processes, how it can be applied across the board. Because I mean, honestly, game development is very multifaceted. So what are certain ways that these can be applied? You shared some, but what are other ways that this can be applied in other aspects of a studio's culture, in terms of like, not just the culture, but also like maybe you mentioned some about the game's design or actual development, but what about like things like marketing or other areas? I mean, what are some quick examples you could provide for this and how this could apply across the board?
Can you repeat that again? I didn't quite understand the question.
Sure. Sorry. I rambled on a little bit. Like, in terms of implementing these processes, how can these be applied to other areas of the work that a studio will do? Let's just say, for example, for marketing, like how these processes can be implemented into marketing that still aligns with like the core values. I guess one example to revert back to a little bit would be like New Blood, but is there anything else that you have done in terms of taking those values and how are those communicated through marketing or even through like the last one you just gave, like through publishers or whatever, and making sure that things are still aligned with everything else, the overall process, I guess?
Yeah. I think one of the things we first have to recognize with this is how often we cannot control this. So, for example, I can be the most anti-crunch studio in history. But if I receive a showcase opportunity to keep the studio alive, say Jeff Keighley knocks on the door and says, "You're in the Game Awards, baby. You got a deadline."
Yep.
That deadline, that external deadline, can result in and this is not for the Game Awards specifically, but it's any major showcase. Mm-hmm. I've known devs who, for example, had to, in a couple of weeks, pull together a fully animated reveal trailer.
Yep.
That's a big lift. If I want to keep my studio alive, but also want to avoid crunch, I will be faced with a direct opposition of values there, where it's like, the external partner that's going to keep us alive has imposed this deadline upon me. And sometimes that means sometimes that results in some of the crunch that we talk about in this medium. An external deadline or entity might not share the same values as you, or your publisher very strongly recommends that you do X, Y, or Z. That is a thing you have limited control over based off of your relationship with the publisher and your ability to advocate for, say, a different direction. As far as Strange Scaffold is concerned, marketing is actually a really good call out, because for Dog Airport game, an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, we developed a lot of that game out in the open. It fit the development structure of the game. It fit the way in which we work, which is a lot of efficiency based, often a lot of efficiency based work that combines discussion of process with discussions of what it's resulting in. And so we get to talk about the tool used to make it to where you can pet every dog with infinite hands. The other games that were coming along subsequently, Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator and Sunshine Shuffle in particular, I was like, okay, Dog Airport game is doing well. It's doing, but we've learned from Dog Airport game that, for example, there's opportunities we missed out on because we didn't make our debut at a world premiere opportunity or something else. Mm-hmm. We could, or perhaps quote unquote should, do Game Pass and subscription negotiations before ever revealing anything. And so I went about trying to make these games the right way. Do all the negotiation beforehand, potentially sign with a partner, make that dev cycle occur in secret. It was the worst. It didn't fit the way in which we were working. We were making so much cool stuff. We had so much to talk about in terms of process. All that was buried behind the scenes for months and months and months, and those conversations dragged on for months and months and months. And what ended up clinching the Space Warlord Game Pass deal was I was like, hey, y'all, we're just going to have to announce the game. We can't just keep holding it, waiting for something to happen. And we announced it, and the announcement popped off. And then Microsoft was like, hey, let's get those conversations finished up. Let's do a thing. And Space Warlord ended up being a Game Pass title. And it's not purely because of when or how we announced on our own, but ultimately the demonstration of the weird high concept that we were pitching happened in the market. And you add that to the fact that we've had a really good long-standing relationship with Xbox and the roll of the dice for any business negotiation, and cool stuff happened. Thank God. The experience of working on Space Warlord and Sunshine Shuffle, and to a degree El Paso Elsewhere, in secret for so long. El Paso Elsewhere was also in secret for a while, but just because it's had a 3-year dev cycle, or it will by the time it comes out, we've had like a year and a half to talk about the game, if not more. So that's all to say, we did it accidentally in a way that fit our projects and what we wanted to see and bring into the world with Dog Airport game. We did it in an alternative, traditional way with our next 3 public titles. And it was a mismatch, as well as carried the risk that at any time that we announced something, we do high concept, auteur, weird things that hopefully are also palatable for a mainstream audience. The idea that a Hades 2 gets announced at the same time that we do anything blows us out of the water, erases our entire narrative. So what we've returned to is now intentionally, we're talking about things within the studio, and we're going to start revealing stuff way sooner. As soon as we have a Steam page and a trailer, we're going to start talking about our games. We've got, alongside Sunshine Shuffle's release very, very soon, we're going to be doing a game announcement next month, and probably announcing just about the rest of our slate before the end of the year and before even the release of El Paso Elsewhere. And that's because we've looked at the total market landscape. We've looked at where we are. We've looked at what brings us the best survivability and what aligns with our strengths. And the long secret dev cycle and the splashy reveal moment, and then the 1 month high churn, high volume lead up to release, that ain't it. That isn't what will or has worked for us, either in terms of business or in terms of our personal creativity. So we're moving away from that now. We've seen several sides of it, and everyone's going to have a different answer. Everyone's going to have a different process. Everyone's going to have different levels of control and resources.
Yeah.
Operating from those things at least means that you'll make logical sense and have something to be able to calibrate in the future.
Right. And what works for you or your studio or your team, etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I know we're coming on time, but there's one thing I want you to, if you can, dive in a little bit quickly here, because you shared a little bit earlier, and I'm just really curious to know this. When you talked about your team and being mindful of your team and how what they're working on can relate to not just the values of the overall the studio, but also their values or what's important to them and whatnot. When you're looking for like different team members or whatever, working with different people, partners, whatever, are there particular qualities that you look for them? And are these qualities, are they relative to helping you, let's say, refine your process? Is it to cater to specific goals? Or would you say that there's even potentially a bigger picture to strive for? Like, what does it look like when you're looking at potential new team members to work with, to be part of the team? Or what are those qualities that you're looking for? And how do they align, I guess, with the overall studio?
So this has also been, in full transparency, a learning process. At first, I was like, Strange Scaffold is so flexible. With our dev cycles, they're human-centric, they're individually focused and built to be that way. We can work with anyone as long as they have the specific skills needed to bring that game to life. And we've worked with a lot of different people, with a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different ranges of experience, and a lot of different internal processes. We have enjoyed and benefited from the process. We've enjoyed and benefited from their presence almost universally. But one big part of the last couple of years is also acknowledging there are just better hires for us. There's people who work better within the inherent structures we have. Just because we're flexible doesn't mean we don't have inherent structures too.
Right.
Was the, kind of obvious point I missed for quite a long time. So, I'd say a Strange Scaffold hire is comfortable with body horror, one. Number two, there is a degree of autonomy and self-determination. We have a lot of production processes in place to be human-centric and so on and so forth. And we have gotten a lot better at providing targeted support and, for example, hard deadlines and direction on people when they need it. But by far, the people who do best within our structure are people who you tell them we need these things. Here is our overarching deadlines in the context in which this is happening, and they autonomously make stuff happen. And we are having checkpoints and discussions along the way to continue to approach the evolving development environment. But if someone needs super defined tasks, we often have very defined vision and sometimes even tasks. But like if someone needs to be told, hey, work on the compiler Tuesday, Wednesday, we need you to do this. Thursday, we need you to do this. This needs to be done by this time. That is a level of additional management and production, which, among other things, doesn't make me happy. I want to provide people a lot of agency and flexibility, especially because we work with people part-time, to define how we fit within their schedule in a healthy way and to make that an ongoing conversation. As opposed to, for example, if you've got a lot of stuff happening in your life, we've got a deadline coming up. I don't want to be the guy telling you, hey, I know you're grieving right now, but we've got a UI asset due by next week.
Right.
Hard decisions and discussions are necessary. This is a reality of any creative effort or any business. But in the past, my dedication to almost to like a lot of transparency and autonomy in when and how people reach goals, there's people it didn't work for. It put them in a position of stress. Later, I created structures with our fantastic producers as an infrastructure team to provide support for those people, but also had to acknowledge the ideals trained scaffold hire embraces kind of that individual flexibility and freedom. And that, among other learnings over time, I don't advocate for strange scaffold as the ideal model for the entire industry, or as an objectively ethical model or a place where we always get things right. But we are, for quite a few people, providing the healthiest and most efficient dev environment they've seen. We're consistently releasing titles. They're consistently visible and interesting and exciting and focused. And then we've got another one right around the corner. So what I'm advocating for here is not the strange scaffold model, but for people to intentionally accept and vocalize the advantages and drawbacks of the models they're pursuing and how they're pursuing it, and to approach that intentionally. Because when we put a standard, an objective marker or evaluation of how a game can be made or how a studio can be operated, we discard an immense amount of talent, and we say implicitly who can't make a studio anymore. If the standard is, for example, every developer must be able to give 100% 4 days a week. That's the way our studio works and how all studios should work, actually. What if you have something that knocks someone out of commission? All of your processes are built around them giving 100% 4 days a week.
Right.
What if they're parents? What if they're about to be parents? What if you don't have the money for that? Us saying that's the only ethical and correct way to make video games says you can't start a studio, says you, expectant family or current family, you don't belong here. You, grieving developer, you need to shut that inside and keep working, because there is no flexibility for you to rearrange your time to fit something else.
Right.
For a supposedly young medium, we sure do talk really, really stridently about how you should make a game. I think individualized models, structures that are vocalized so people can know what they're opting into working with an entity are core to avoiding the human pain and suffering that means we have an increasingly small and disgruntled pool of survivors making the projects that bring so many people joy and burning themselves out in the process.
Yeah. No, really great summary and explanation of all that, and just a lot to take from. And if I were to kind of distill it and really boil it down, it just sounds like when creating these processes, especially across the board, leading with an intention and also having empathy, and how those processes, how are they going to relate to people, how are they going to relate to everything else, is probably, but it's simple when you boil it down that way, but it's not easy.
And this is worth saying as well. If you don't like what your processes actually, if you are to verbalize what your processes encourage or result in, and you don't like it, you should probably change that process. Because you might be like, but wait, when I say the way our studio works or what it actually values based off of the way it currently functions, that sounds bad. It might be. And that is not a indictment. That's a learning moment.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because what was it? Going back quite a bit, I used to be a writing tutor. And it was so funny when other students would come in and they're like, well, this needs work. And I'm like, okay, I'm looking at this, but what are you trying to say? and they're like, well, I'm trying to say this. It's like, then write that. They're like, oh, I didn't know how simple that could be. It's like, yeah, but but it's like the same thing. It's like, what are you trying to do? What is your intention? Well, it's this, but what it sounds like or looks like is you're doing the opposite. So sometimes I'm so glad you called that out, because sometimes it can be so simple. And again, it calls back to your example this saying, like self-evaluation. What are these questions that you're asking yourself, and asking yourself those things all the time? So
that's what we learned with the building more explicit production structures for people who needed it. Because I kept going like, but we've provided them with freedom and autonomy, and we've given them strong directive, and we've been transparent about the overall process, and they fit into it. This is working really well for other people, but it's not working for them, or it's only sporadically working for them. And I was like, oh, what we're saying is that we support everyone, but actually we do not have the structures in place to support everyone individually.
Right. Yep.
So I buckled down, and I altered the things that were out of alignment to hit that goal.
Awesome. So many good things there. And I'm not even going to go off or extrapolate from that anymore, because you just summarized it perfectly. All right. Well, I know we're here coming on time and everything. So before we close, I'd love for you to just share, how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to, or do you have a website? Where can they learn more about Sunshine Shuffle? Because you shared a lot of cool, interesting there. How can people connect or get to learn more about Straffled Games? Whatever you got, let's hear it.
So when is this supposed to air? That'll determine what I can say. Oh,
right. So when you are all listening to this, it will be most likely on... Oh, let me check here. April 25th.
April 25th. Okay. So Sunshine Shuffle is on Steam. You can wishlist it now. We'll have another platform to announce in the very near future. And the game is also coming out very soon. So get in before it's popular. The studio, Strange Scaffold, can be followed on Instagram and on Twitter. You can wishlist our games. We have multiple coming down the pipe. I'm always talking about our stuff at Rit Nelson on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And we're trying to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible, and being open about the victories and the setbacks we encounter along the way. So I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak here, and thank everyone for listening.
Yeah, same here. And we can't thank you enough for being, so transparent and open, not just with us today, but in general, because it's just so good to hear this, and we would really appreciate more people out there, and glad you're being an advocate on this front for this. So again, thank you for your time and everything, and being on the show.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action.